From Florida's Space Coast, this is Your Career.
Welcome to Your Career. I'm Debbie Featherston, your host, and with me is Reggie Crane, president of Next Level Coaching. Thank you for being with me. Curtis Curry, who is president of Quality Learning International, and Karl Lieb, who's president of the Character Corporation. Gentlemen, thank you for being with me. Now, in this segment of Your Career, our focus really is the topic of change management, and if time permitting, I'd like to explore a little bit around innovation. 70% of change initiatives fail in organizations and businesses. You know, what's really going on here? What are you seeing as you're going out and doing work in change management?
Cotter and his graduate students have done a great deal of research around what makes successful change. How do organizations navigate change successfully? So he really looks at organizational change, and that's obviously an important component, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about the things that need to be in place for organizational change. One of the things that he realized more recently was a change from his first research study, was that emotion is an important component of change, that you have to speak to people on an emotional level before they will really change. So the data, organizations typically use data, they use statistics. We need to increase return on sales, we need to increase our market share, and for some reason, for the rank and file, those aren't great motivators. So part of the task of leaders in organizations is finding ways to position change so that people can put their heart into it.
Get that buy-in.
And one of the things that when I go into a company, the employees have to understand something. And I think of it like almost like a diet. I'm aware I need to lose weight. I desire to lose weight. I know that if I lose weight, I'll be healthier. But that's all words. I haven't done a thing. And until I start to practice it, nothing's going to change. They have to tap into that emotional aspect of those first three, but then they have to be skilled enough to say, okay, how do we now go do? And that's where a lot of the challenges are. How do we go do it?
So how does an organization tap that? What are some can you give us an example or two that might help the viewers better understand how an organization might tap that emotional or address that emotional issue?
I think one of the things is having a really good communication plan, right? Laying it all out there in terms of what's going to be happening, and then having a champion, somebody who is passionate about the change, that is respected by the folks in the organization, because as we well know, anytime there's any kind of change, there's a certain amount of fear that comes along with that. In today's world, that I'm losing my job, right? So everything has to kind of be clear, and there are three things, right? The transparency of what is being changed. I think sometimes a lot of organizations, before they really get to the point where they are really clear about what it is that's being changed, I mean, they're well into the change. So therefore, there's some folks who may have gotten left behind. Understanding why the change is necessary. Yeah, I think that's at the root of it, isn't it? Yeah, because there are a lot of organizations who have people in those organizations, and they have continually been going through change just because somebody new came in and felt like it should be done differently with no valid reason underlying it. And then lastly, clarity of how it's going to be done. So now everybody understands how they're going to fit in the equation. They understand what's being done, you know, what's going to be required of them. If I don't have the skill set right now to participate, what's going to be done about that? That communication plan, that champion, and dealing with those three questions, I think is really, really important. It doesn't guarantee success, but I think to the point of allowing people to feel included, right? That's how you get to their hearts. I think it goes a long way of trying to get at that.
And they need to have that communication plan. You know, you started with communication, and I'll pick up on communication. How am I going to communicate in various ways, not just one way? Just because I communicate to you something, that doesn't mean that it was clear, because you might need to be communicated differently. Reggie might need it in another fashion.
So it could be in an email, so it could be an email blast, it could be a posting, it could be a town hall or a team meeting, any of those kinds of things.
All the above to tap into, communicate, and then communicate.
Particularly on the front end, right? During that first phase where they know something's going to happen, but they're not sure exactly what that change is going to look like.
Yeah, and then consistency of the same information. Many venues news, but the same information coming out. So now people start to get familiar with, okay, yeah, this is going on. And when they start having those conversations at the water fountain, they've all heard the same information via whatever resource or whatever venue it came from. They heard the same exact information, which makes a major difference.
And what are some of the differences? Because the first thing that comes to my mind would be trust.
Yeah.
How would that really impact trust? If we already have a high degree of trust, you know, and everybody's hearing the same thing, it would really...
If there's already a high degree of trust, you've already set yourself up to maybe be successful. Remember, I gave you that awareness, desire, knowledge?
Indeed.
Well, you have to have the practice, but with that practice, there has to be a certain level of success. If you don't have that success, and as soon as you get something that's successful, you celebrate it. You encourage these folks. Look what we just did. I don't care how small it is. You have to let them know they're doing great. And again, communicating that they're doing great. So it's the trust is there. If it's already there, if it's not there, the communicating is going to go a long way in trying to establish that trust.
And that sounds like caring and just rewarding people when they're doing well, recognizing that. Because I think with change, that's something that often gets glossed over. You know, they're so busy taking care of people who are not managing the change well. That, to your point, Karl.
Cotter talks a lot about a guiding coalition too. So people who are respected inside the organization, who are going to be seen as authorities, who individuals automatically respect. But for larger organizations anyway, the organization for me is my leader. And so my leader, if the trust isn't there for my leader and you don't have a good communication plan in place, then it's going to be much more difficult. You're going to have a lot more problems. You're going to have a lot more pushback on the change. So I think the individual leader's role is very, very important. And when we talk about communication, we're talking about actually making a communication plan as part of the change effort. So it merits its own special treatment.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, a great point. Setting milestones, following up. Did we get there? Did we not get there? What helped us not get there? What helped us to get there? Communicating those successes out there. Hey, we reached milestone 1. We weren't 100%. We were at 85%. Great work, folks. Here are the things that didn't go right then. Let's roll that knowledge into the next phase and make sure that we learn from the things that didn't go well the first time. And if trust is high, I think you're going to find people that are going to be giving more of themselves to this whole difficult thing called change. When it's not there, I think you're going to have this inertia that's going to be just holding the organization at a place where it can't. It's going to move forward, but it's going to move forward at a place where it's just doing a whole lot of damage to people, what you're trying to get done in the whole 9 yards. So that trust factor is just really, really, really important.
Yeah, I'm thinking snail's pace and costs is going through the roof. You know, so.
And then there's the numbers aspect of it. I got real excited. I was at a location where they had some data out there, and the core that Curtis referred to, you have to have a certain percent of your organization, this core, really be on board. I'm just excited about it. And they threw a number out there, and I was really excited because I'd heard the number tossed around for years as just industry appreciation. Everybody just assumed it. And I said, where'd you get that number? Well, that's just the number we've heard. And so I decided, okay, if one thing's taught me about in school was I know how to research. So I went and I actually looked it up. That percentage that you need for a change to really take effect is going to be anywhere from about 15 to 25, 30%. If you can get that many of your people, 20% of your people really radically involved in
so they become champions.
They not only become champions, they build momentum.
I got it.
And that's where you have to get that. So you go for that 20% and embrace them, and then that's where the momentum starts.
That's fantastic, because I think to me that's encouraging, because 20% seems awful low. And if you can get great momentum and get people, you know, moving forward with 20%, that's great.
20%, and then you got 50% of the people that are just kind of fence sitters, and then you got that 30% that are just radically against it. You get that 50%, and all of a sudden, you're going to get half of the really strong holdovers because the momentum again.
You know, we talked about, the fact that John Cotter, he's done a tremendous amount of work. There's a number of other people that have really done a tremendous amount of work in this area. Bill Bridges is one that I think of that's probably spent 45 or 50 years of his career just exploring how humans deal with change. So he's looking at the people side of the change equation. Who are some of the others that you think are important for organizations to be really familiar with?
Kurt Lewin comes to mind.
Oh,
Just in terms of we have these frozen behaviors, and before we can change, we have to thaw out those existing behaviors. And again, that speaks to, I think, the emotional part and the feelings part of dealing with change, because it's not all logic. In fact, I think Cotter would argue that emotion plays at least equal role, and feelings play an equal role to that facts and figures play.
People will want to revert back to the way they were.
Absolutely.
It's just the way it is.
Human nature.
I have all kinds of exercises that I put them through, and it's time after time after time. They will revert back to their prior behavior, even though they know they're in a change exercise, and they just can't help it. And they have to be aware, hey, am I just going back to where I was? And if I can make them aware of that, that's phenomenal. That's just great, because then they say, okay, I'm just going back to the way it was, and that's not the place I want to be.
Yeah, and that's why within that whole that Kurt Lewin model, right, where you talk about the unfreezing, the change, and the refreezing, that refreezing in the policies, the procedures, the way things are done now, and constantly communicating that over and over again inside the organization, outside the organization, it doesn't preclude it 100%, but it helps with what Karl was talking about in terms of allowing folks to catch themselves and say, okay, yeah, I know I was comfortable doing that, but this is the way we're doing it now, and I got to make sure I stay focused in this place.
You know, when you're working with organizations to really be successful with their change initiatives, what are some of the things that you feel need to be in place? And I'm thinking specifically around the leaders.
I work with leaders at two different levels. Well, first there's organizational change, and Cotter does give us a pretty good idea of what those steps are and the things that need to be in place. We need to have a vision. We need to have that guiding coalition. We need to communicate for buy-in. At the organizational level, that's very important. Leaders sometimes don't realize that they're human beings too, in terms of experiencing feelings as they go through change. So I use a tool called the Change Style Indicator, which gives individual leaders feedback on how they prefer to approach change. And of course, their employees also will exhibit these differences. But you have conservers on one end of the spectrum, and you have originators on the other, as you can imagine what these might refer to. And then pragmatists in the middle, very practical look at change when we really need to change. Again, that self-awareness that Reggie talked about is very important to a starting point. So if I understand my style at dealing with change, and I can handle the emotions that I'm experiencing going through these changes, that's one task, that's one set of skills. And then the skills helping my people navigate change successfully, a little bit different competencies there.
And one of the neat ahas is when you recognize in yourself your style, it's to be aware that that doesn't mean that that's your style, because that's how I accept change as a leader. I have to recognize not everyone's accepting change in the same way that I am.
Or at the same pace. Great point, Karl.
Pace or style even.
Yeah, we started using a thing called a verbal 360, where we would, a leader who was about to go through change, we'd ask them to identify some folks below them, their peers and superiors, and we'd get those folks together and ask them three basic questions. How does the leader deal with challenge right now, right? What does he do really well? What does he or she not do really well? And what's one piece of advice you'd offer him? And so we get all that information in, affinitize it into themes, and then we sit down with the leader and we say, look, we ask him the same questions. And then based on what he says or she says, we take their answers and we juxtapose them to, here are the themes that came out from your folks that work for you, your peers and superiors. So what are your thoughts about this? And a lot of them, when they see that, they say, you know what? That's right. And so what it does is it allows us to let them get some real-time information about how they are viewed in the organization when it comes down to dealing with difficult situations and what things they should focus on before they launch out into this change effort in the organization.
In some of the smaller organizations, I've gone into a couple small manufacturing companies, and I'll do a focus group of every employee. And I'll do, half of them will stay out on the floor and half of them will come in, or whatever the case might be, to break them up. But it's the same thing. Give me your perceptions, whether they're right or wrong, I don't care. I just want, what are the perceptions?
Yeah.
And then when you sit down and talk to the leader, it's a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
It's a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
Interesting. What kinds of training or coaching might you take a leader through to prepare them to be able to deal with the people side of this change? Curtis, that's an area you work in, is it not, the developing the leaders and helping to prepare them?
Yes, I use a lot of instrumented learning. So I mentioned the change style indicator. There are elements that you can bring from other models to actually plan the change. I've been able to do that with some aerospace companies that I work with who are going through major change efforts. The change style indicator, again, understanding your employees' differences. I know some of my colleagues use DISC quite a bit, Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, all of those things that can give people heightened awareness of their own preferences and how that might impact how they lead, how they prefer to lead others.
Do you find, I find anyways, that it's me getting a certain level of trust with them so that they will at least open the door to be, that I can be heard and listen to what they're saying. So in many cases, at least it comes across to me a lot of times, who is that leader? Figuring that person out. They're all going to be different.
Yeah.
And if it's a large group of people, then that's a totally different thing. Then you use the instruments and you try to find out, all you can in that respect. If I'm just talking with the owner of the company,
right,
I need to establish that relationship with that owner so that I can really start to get a feel for what that person's going to respond to.
Yeah, one of the things that I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that I do with leaders who are about to go through change at some point in time early in that process, because when change happens, there is going to be some level of conflict that is going to happen, maybe happen on a consistent basis, right? And so one of the assessments that I use is the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument, right? Where you talk about, assertiveness and cooperativeness, because those two elements, when you start talking about change, and I heard somebody mention earlier this whole idea about position versus interest. When there's change about to happen, people have more things in common as far as interests are concerned than they really know. But because of the fact that they come into it with these positions, right, here is my position, here is your position, and they're doing this, that understanding the assertiveness and cooperativeness piece, it really helps to be able to allow folks to kind of understand how they show up in that space when they meet with conflict. And if I discover that when I'm confronted with conflict, I'm a person that's really, really assertive, always trying to go after what I want, and I realize that is not going to help this change effort, succeed, then it gives me the opportunity to say, well, Reg, maybe you need to work on becoming a bit more cooperative and be more concerned about the other person as well, and vice versa. If I'm more cooperative all the time, maybe I need to understand how to be a bit more assertive sometimes, because sometimes it's a balance based on what you're trying to get done.
Interesting point.
One of the bigger challenges for me anyway, I think it's a bigger challenge, I'd be interested in your opinions as well, the higher you go in the organization, but helping people understand this feelings part of the change.
Right.
And I love the metaphor from a book called Switch, and Switch has an elephant.
It's a great book.
Elephant, those are our feelings, and you've got the rider, the cognitive part, the facts-based part, and then you've got the path, the change path, whatever that might be. And you can use all the data, and you can have the numbers down, but sometimes that giant elephant that you're riding doesn't want to go go the way you want it to go. And so the elephant part, the feeling part that we all experience, I think it's very important that leaders not make light of that, because we are human beings, and again, that emotional part, that feelings part, is very important if you want to get people all moving in the same direction.
Right. I think that's great, because it really builds on William Bridges' 3-step model, where he's talking about people have to really start with figuring out what's ending, what's really going to be over as a result of this change. So it's really asking themselves that question of, how's this change really going to impact me? So when a manager sits down and asks them what's concerning you, right, that can start bringing some of those emotions out, and I think they might be able to begin to address some of those more effectively. So but that ties in nicely with Bridges' model there.
Yeah, and it's part of the communication plan, right? How is it going to impact people?
Yeah.
And then what are we going to do to make sure that it has minimal negative impact to allow them to see the positive aspects of what this change is all about?
Right, yeah. I think that's a critical first step or early step, so that we can get the buy-in and we have less loss of productivity and morale. Because, I use a 5-stage model of change. Workato, I know, has a 5 or 8-step. And those first 3 stages, those early stages, are always filled with a lot of emotion. There's resistance. They get stuck in the letting go. What am I going to have to keep or let go? And how's this going to affect me? And, some of them just camp out and want to build these cities and recruit all this negative, they're recruiting people. There's just all that negativity and blame and complaining.
And productivity goes down the tank.
That and morale are really in the tank, absolutely. So, as, you've all mentioned, you're helping leaders really deal with having those conversations with those employees and being able to be more effective in moving them forward. Any additional insights or perspective that you can offer around that?
One of the, I guess, to summarize it, I'll go back to almost how I started. Everyone is they're all individuals. Even the organizations are individuals, if you look at it like that. I will not treat this organization the way I just did that small business. It just won't work. And so that's where our years of experience come into play, is when we walk in there, we get a feel for what that organization is.
And to your point, because I know you've worked for a couple real large companies in your career, at least 2 or 3 that I'm aware of, Karl, and in your consulting, you mentioned small business, but you've also worked with it, maybe just a department that's really being impacted,
a lot
or
of times,
division.
Within the corporate world, they brought me in just to fix their department.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's not a matter of fix, it's a matter of just misunderstanding and just being there and going through the process, and all of a sudden, after a day workshop, they're grinning at each other. They might still be pointing at each other, but they're pointing and they're grinning, as opposed to
At least you've got the morale and you got some collaboration, different tone, right? Sure. Well, in the last few minutes we've got, I'm curious, what are some of the typical barriers and what are some of the typical contributors that you see? I think there's some common barriers and contributors that we often see in organizations that are either going to prohibit their ability to be successful or really move them forward.
Change. The biggie, and I think you mentioned at the very beginning, fear.
Yeah.
People are afraid, period.
That's a big barrier.
And everybody has a different afraid of, ... And that's what you have to overcome. What are people fearful of? How can I mitigate that fear?
And I'm really looking at organizational, not just individual. So
I think the way to do that, to deal with that fear, is to have a communication plan. Again, I hate to come back to that.
Sure.
That's right.
Sure.
But companies, when you look at what causes companies to derail, most often it's around the communication itself, not the direction they're going, not the strategy that they want to put in place, but the fact that they don't have a good communication plan, speaking to concerns at different levels of the organization, and that derails organizations frequently.
Yeah.
And when Curtis mentioned earlier about the communication plan is a real plan, that means that it's taken really, really seriously, right? And I think having clarity about, again, what the organization's relevance or purpose is today, and everybody having understanding around that, and then having an understanding, okay, here is where we're trying to go in the future, so that you can actually drive the change, right, as opposed to being driven by the change. I think that whole idea about being driven by the change, it puts organizations in a reactionary mode where I think they try to do the best that they can, but they're trying to react to something in the moment. But if you sit down and chart it, here's where I am now, here's where I want to be in the next 7 years, and you actively work to create milestones and you move the organization forward, you can actually direct most of the change your organization goes through, I think.
And when you're talking a communication plan, the ones that I've seen that are successful, they created a communication team. A team of people that will anticipate what's going to be coming down the pike or be able to respond very quick to something that they didn't anticipate. And everybody knows who to go to make that communication that needs to be made.
And having the right people on that team.
Yep.
Yeah.
The right people,
Yeah, that's an interesting. Tell me more about that. What do you mean by right people, just briefly?
Well, as an example, right, using Myers-Briggs as an example, you have decision makers, thinking deciders, logical facts, and you have feeling deciders, right, subjective value system. You have sensors where they process information very specifically, and you have intuitives, big picture possibilities in the future. Having a mixture of those kinds of people will ensure that you're processing the right kind of information and you're making logical decisions, but at the same time, you're ensuring that the people perspective is included in that process as well. So that's just one way of making sure that you have a mixture of the right kind of people to help you make the best decisions for the organization.
Yeah, and it sounds like that you have everyone represented at the table.
Yeah.
That's one of the key things. You know, this has been a really fast conversation around change management. You know, you're looking at change management, and yet there's a tie to leadership, there's a tie to conflict management, there's a tie to communication. I mean, you know, employee engagement. I mean, all these things are all woven together when we start dealing with change. So change management is a very needed and very complex topic.
Very challenging.
So thank you so much for sharing your insights and perspective. And with that, on behalf of my guest and everyone here on the set of Your Career, I'm Debbie Featherston, your host, and remember, be career happy.
More information about this program is available online at millermediagroup.org.